Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Uber Cordero show for this week. And we are happy to join you, to be with you this afternoon. And today, joining us is Dler Awsman. Dler Osman is a student at the College of Idaho and is from Iraq. He's from Iraq by how the world is organized, but he's not really from Iraq, as you will learn later on, and he'll tell us more. So he's going to go through his life story to tell us a little bit more about Iraq, ISIS, and Yazidi situation in the country. And part of what we're doing in the last month is having conversation with people to hear their stories. And even though this show is primarily about Africa, some of the challenges that we are talking about are global, and for that reason, an insight from the Middle East from people like Dila is very instructive. So welcome to the show, Dila.
First of all, yeah. First of all, thank you so much, Professor, for having me in your show and giving me the chance to talk about my experience and story. And I hope it would be of use for the viewers and to give a narrative and a story to some people who are not here in the Middle East. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm actually going to be thanking you for taking your time to come out and join us and to talk about your life. That's a big gift for us this summer. So tell the audience about who you are. Who is Dler Awsman?
Yeah, well, this is quite a complex way, and it's a complex story and experience, and it's hard to introduce myself in few sentences, but I'll talk a little bit about who I am. I'm Dler Awsman. I'm a student here at the College of Idaho in the United States. I major in international political economy, but I've been here in this country for 3 years. Very welcoming, but also challenging place for 3 years. But where I am originally from and where my story starts is quite a big different from where I am now. I was born in 1999 in a residential complex in northwest Iraq, northern region of Iraq, and specifically in the city of Sinjar, which is a city between Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. And in that very complex region of Middle East, it's a home to a minority, an ethno-religious minority called the Yazidis, whom I belong to and whom we will be talking more about in a bit. I lived the life of a member of a minority in Middle East, in Iraq, in a time of conflict and war and disasters that faced the region over the last 20 years. And it would be an honor to talk about it this afternoon. Yeah.
Thank you, Dler, for that introduction. A lot of people of the audience of this show are primarily African people, and I think it's important for us to know about other spaces because growing up in Kenya, all the time when I saw the news about the Middle East was about wars and destruction and extremism, and I came to the United States, and the only thing I knew as representation of Africa were those things that I mentioned, including poverty in the case of Africa. So we have a situation where we experience otherness, like we generalize human beings as only not only lacking agency, but also synonymous with certain things that are not necessarily a complete wholesome view of life. And I think that your story is really important for us, not only in terms of enriching our understanding of Iraq and minorities in Iraq, but also sharing how some of the challenges that human beings face all over the world are similar. And some of the ignorance that we all have about other people are global, right?
Absolutely. No, I would like to add a little bit on that. The thing is, well, yes, I mean, this afternoon we'll be talking about it. A big part of experience being from Middle East is war, and I'll be talking about genocide and about extremism, and those are all elements. Yes, they happen in the region, uh, but that shouldn't be the limitation to the story. The story has uniqueness in it. The story of it's of a human, just like every human around the world is a guy who's a son of a family who had fun in his life, who had community, who had culture, who still have connections, relations, families, parties, weddings. This is a story of a life, not just one abstract thing. We get it from the region, and that's fully who we are now. So while I'll be mainly focusing on maybe the negative side of the story, but there is way more to what Middle East is and what I am than those basic things that we'll be talking about.
Yeah, and yeah, just to add a little bit on that, it's also the idea that part of these conversations is not to say we're going to solve this problem. You know, we're not savior. Nobody's a savior. Part of it is just understanding and having a much more detailed knowledge about spaces that are foreign to us. Don't you think so?
Absolutely. I think we're not savior, but at least by having a conversation, you are making another human knowledgeable. You're giving them a gift of knowledge from your region, and it's through this interaction and knowledge exchange and experience exchange that we human can maybe get to the solutions. I mean, maybe this is what we can do with our limited abilities. Maybe telling the story is what we can do to make other feel it, be aware of it, and know what's happening in this world.
Thank you. Couldn't have said it much better. Now, if you're just joining us, we're talking to Dler Awsman. He's an Iraqi, is a student at the College of Idaho and studies political economy. He's a gifted student, has been in my class several times, maybe 3 times, I think, and has always been brilliant in many ways. Now, who are the Yazidis, and how do they differ from other people in Middle East and North Africa? And why are they targeted? What is, tell us, unpack this for us, like for third grader, for example.
Yes, well, it's hard to explain all of it to a third grader because this is Middle East. That's first thing to start from. It is a very diverse and intersected and complex region, and it's hard to extract one story easily from it. But I can give a brief description of Yazidis, and I think the question is well put because it's by understanding its difference from the other communities that maybe we can give some good narrative here about the Yazidis themselves. The Yazidis are an ethno-religious minority, as I said in the beginning, and by ethno-religious I mean they're ethnically distinct. They see themselves ethnically as a different identity, but also religiously. The origins of the community go, as we believe, as the Yazidis and as some historical records. The Yazidis are somehow the descendants of ancient Mesopotamian religions. They go back to Mithras, to Babylonians, to more ancient religions of the Fertile Crescent and the land of the two rivers, Mesopotamia. That's why we have so many practices in the religions that go back to sort of those ancient kind of practice, like the worship of some natural elements, the importance of light and sun. Those are all from ancient Kurdish, but also Mesopotamian religions. So I think the proper definition for is syncretic. So it has kept some elements from almost many traditions historically in the region, but it has also, with time and as it was forced to adapt to new forces that were expanding in the region, starting from Byzantines, then to Islamic, the new Abrahamic dominations of the region, the religion had to somehow adapt to those new changes. So the Yazidis have acquired so many Christian values, Islamic values, and it has some form of while it has this sort of natural Mesopotamian ancient element to it, it also has sort of structures of Abrahamism in it. However, these differences has always kept them excluded, unpersecuted by different empires and powers in the region. And this is because most of history of Yazidis wasn't actually written by them. It was written by outsiders, by people who were ruling them, people who were coming from outside. They didn't know much about the religion, or they were systematically against minorities. And the first records, like the closest historical records to this we have is from the Ottoman empires, who wrote a lot of writings about Yazidis, especially the muftis. And muftis were Islamic legislators of the Ottoman Empire. They started writing about the Yazidis as infidels, or they are, in Arabic, we call them Khawarij, the people who get out of Islam. So there's different narratives started rising about the Yazidis, and not even Ottoman Empire. It goes back and even into Umayyad, Abbasiyad, other sort of dominant Islamic empires, but also Christians in the region wrote a lot about Yazidis, showing them as infidels and as people who lost, who got out of the religion. And so the history of persecution is just as similar to the history of the narrative that was written about the Yazidis. The community has been facing um, massacres throughout its history. So, and most of this is left from our oral tradition of our history, but there are also records from Arab writers and Turkish writers and about how Yazidis were almost have gone through 75 massacres, if not genocide, through their history. And some of the records show that Yazidis were of millions of counts before the Ottoman Empire, but it which included parts of eastern Turkey of today, where many Yazidis there, in Syria, in different regions of Ottoman Empire. But the continuous persecution killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions, over time, and made many of the communities go to diaspora. We still have big, large Yazidi communities in Armenia who run away with Armenians. Many of them live in Moscow. There are tens of thousands of Yazidis in Moscow who ran away during the Ottoman genocides, and so the community started getting shattered, and still there are what we are Yazidis that are now in the world are less than, if not less than 1.5 million, they're less than 2 millions. So and they live mainly in diaspora, but also big chunks of them, the biggest chunks in Iraq and some places in Syria. Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for that elaborate discussion. I didn't know all of that. I just knew about the Yazidi genocide since ISIS. But what you're trying to say is Yazidis, what you're saying, or not what you're trying to say. What you're saying is Yazidis are not Muslims and they're not Christians, but they live in the Fertile Crescent, and they were like the Native Americans of those regions. These people came after.
Yes, so they well, that's at least on our belief, but there's also so much scholarly work. So I'm not talking here just based on my personal knowledge, because this is one area that I really have stronger experience in the research of it, because I was gonna show you, and maybe I can send you the image later. I have worked in typing 2 books about Yazidis. This is not writing it, but typing. So I would be with authors writing about Yazidis, about the history, genocide. One of them was my uncle, who is a researcher and judge, but also some other writers. I have done a lot of, been involved in a lot of research about Yazidis, and also I was involved. There was this research by Venezia, Friuli region in Italy, and Udine University on Yazidi history, and I was responsible of all the Kurdish translation, which was the project was preserving Yazidi heritage. So here I'm talking about historical facts too, as much as I'm talking about what Yazidi themselves believe. And there are historical facts that Yazidis go back to the ancient Mesopotamian roots. They do have indigenous roots, but we know that as more hegemonic empires came, they had to adapt somehow their cultures and make it in a form that was similar to new Abrahamic dominant religions in the region.
Good stuff. Now, the question I do have for you is, the Yazidis speak a language the same as the Kurds?
Yes. Yeah, so that's the complexity there comes in. So in the beginning, I said Yazidis are ethno-religious minority. So, well, how then they're ethnically different from the Kurds? So as language and culture, we shared a lot with the other Kurds in Iraq and Syria and Turkey. The music is almost the same. The food is almost the same. We have a strong cultural heritage together. But so there are two different explanations of how this is. Part of it is it's believed that all the Kurds were Yazidi historically before the rise of Islam. They were either Yazidis or Zoroastrians. The ones towards the east and the Persian Empire, those were Zoroastrians. Those were the Zoroaster and the other sort of ancient religion. And in the west, which is Turkey, Eastern Turkey today, Kurds and Syria, and still there are many artifacts of this, they were Yazidis. So that's one of the narratives. So Yazidis, as those other Kurds, they turned Muslim. They started also engaging on there are many examples of the Kurds also started after the ones that were turned Muslim, they started engaging in the massacres against Yazidis in collaboration with the Ottomans and the Arab empires. So here it comes sort of a division. We speak the same language, we have the same sort of history, but sort of the other Kurds who are Muslim and the Yazidis who speak Kurdish, they differentiate themselves from each other. Now identities are fluid. I personally have also Kurdish identity is a big part of who I am. I personally, but most of the Yazidis, they sort of see themselves distinctive from other Kurds too, because of the
Even
historical.
as they speak Kurdish or
Even though they speak Kurdish and they
of Arabic as a language too.
Some Yazidis do speak Arabic too. So what I'm saying, the identity here is very fluid. So there are Yazidis who speak Arabic. There are some who speak Kurdish because the community got assimilated into many throughout its history, and it's complex now to define its identity. But what's easy to say that Yazidis see themselves as the outside has seen them distinct and sort of different. They have always seen themselves different too, have internalized that in some ways. Yeah.
I totally understand you because, in East Africa, especially in the coast, we talk about Swahili culture. And what is Swahili culture? It's a mixture of people from the Middle East who married local Bantu women and created the culture and the language. And over time, started seeing themselves as superior. They call these people who are non-Muslims as kafir, which is literally an N-word in the languages of the East.
Yeah. Also, it was used against Yazidis too. It was used.
They were called the same.
Yeah.
And then this mostly Arabized Swahili people at the top of the society went around capturing other people into slavery and shipping them to the Middle East and instigated, for the most part, colonization of East and Central Africa.
Yeah.
Because they,
Yeah.
So it's complex. On one hand, you're African. On the other, you are Arab. On another, you are Muslim. On another, so it's really multi-layered and complex in that sense.
It's hard to just be definitive and say this is it. It's more challenging and complex than that. Yeah.
Very complex. So you as a Yazidi, you talked about experiencing this multitude genocide over generation since the advent of Islam and domination of Christian religion in that region. And then talk about the latest that happens in your generation and that leads you to living as a refugee in your own land. Tell us about that a little bit.
So would you mind if I sort of give it a wider history to it, which would start from modern Iraq state? That would sort of
something that our leaders viewers who are not super knowledgeable
so maybe that would help. Yeah. So, well, we talked about until the Ottoman history of Yazidis, sort of how they were under Islamic Empire. They were seen as infidels. They were continuously facing persecution based on their religion. And so in 1920s, the modern Iraqi state is built through the British Mandate and the League of Nations. The new state is built, and the new state was supposed to sort of be more equal, more fair, more accepting, more building an Iraqi identity. Um, so the Yazidis as religion stopped getting persecuted in some ways, even though they were excluded from the governments, they didn't have any real positions. However, they weren't targeted directly because of their religion, at least in the surface. However, here problems get even more complex as we talked about the Kurdish language. Now, the modern Iraqi state was built on Arab nationalism, Arab chauvinism, especially after the Ba'ath Party came to power. Arab socialism sort of became the identity of the nation, and now
So what's
Yazidis.
the Ba'ath Party? I mean, many people don't know what the Ba'ath Party is. Is that the party of Saddam Hussein, right?
Yes, so Ba'ath means in some way revive or
Renaissance.
giving life. So it was in Arabic, it was Hizb al-Ba'ath al-Arabi al-Ishtiraki. So
Yeah.
the party of sort of revival, revision of the socialist
Is it
Arab
that
social.
way of saying make Iraq great again?
It was in some ways, yeah. That's how Saddam sort of envisioned it, and
Okay.
he saw himself in this sort of in this vision of he's the new sort of Khalifa of Islam. He's a new leader that's gonna revive the Arab world. That's how sort of was his narrative towards the Iraq war and against the American. He's the hero. He's the new hero that's gonna both he internalized this Arab chauvinist vision, but also the ancient Iraqi and Babylon is gonna come back. So that's a narrative we could go in it for hours and a story we could talk about it for hours. But as of relation to Yazidis started getting persecuted because they spoke Kurdish again. And this is where my family got in clash with the Ba'ath Party and back in the day and with they had problems with the regime because they started persecuting Yazidis also got involved in Kurdish resistance against Saddam, and this is when it became a big problem. So what they started to do in 80s and 70s, because the Yazidis were also sort of intertwined with this resistance, and they weren't Arabs and they weren't Muslim. So what they started to doing, they start an Arabization process. So what's an Arabization process? You come, there are the Yazidi mountains, Sinjar. Sinjar is a big mountain. You have Yazidis living in mountains in their indigenous villages. What do? You're like, it's hard to control those within the modern state. So you go, you burn their villages to the ground. You bring them into residential complexes in the more plain areas, and you surround them with Arab Muslim villages. So that's what they did to my parents in the 80s and 70s until 90s. So our old villages were burned. They were brought into Tel Qasab, where I was born. It was a residential complex, very dry area, far away from our own indigenous mountain areas, and we're surrounded by Arab villages. So, well, I wanted to talk about that a little bit because it's important to what happens in 2014. So in 2003, back then I'm 5 years old, the Americans invade Iraq. And now the Iraqi state has fallen. And when I say the Iraqi state has fallen, because with the American invasion, they dissolved the army, they dissolved the government. So Iraq as a state, the army and the bureaucracy, everything is gone. So it becomes a chaotic state that's not even controlled by Americans. The old regime is gone, and now you have open borders, hungry people for tens of years because of embargo. So it becomes a chaotic area. And back then I'm 5 years old. Sinjar becomes we are constantly under the threat because we are connected first of all to Syrian border, where was the main line of the terrorism uh, coming into Iraq. the extremists. We are also close to Mosul, which was a big center to Sunni resistance. And all around us are Arab Sunni areas where those would be the household for resistance, first against the Americans, second against the sort of emerging sectarian Shia government in Baghdad. So our area became an area of like civil war, fights. Every day you can hear bombs, explosions, and terrorist attacks. And because Yazidis were in this region, we started getting targeted. Like, well, I will go a little personal here. My dad's cousin and his son, because they were working with Americans as interpreter, they were both beheaded in Mosul, and their heads were sent to us. Tel Azir and Siba Sheikha, their two complexes close to where I was, were exploited in 2007. And so there's this constant terrorist attacks. Mosul is almost always problematic. The region is all problematic. And this sort of continue. This is a big chunk of my life from 2003 till 2014 is just that. It's beyond Sinjar. It's a problem all around us. We are surrounded by hostile areas. There's civil war, there's sectarian war, there's terrorism. Now we come to 2014, and this is 3 years after the Syrian civil war. In Syria, ISIS has taken many regions. But what happens, we are in the side by Syria. So I live in the border with Syria. I'm more impacted by Syria than Iraq. So ISIS starts expanding, and city after city in Iraq, a military that the United States had prepared for more than 13 years, started falling as if they didn't have any resistance against ISIS. And in a matter of few months, Mosul is gone, Karbala in Iraq is gone, regions of Karbala, not Karbala, but regions of it, and Bari is gone, Tikrit is gone. Those are big regions of Iraq. The whole central Iraq is controlled by ISIS. Our little city is left. But as I said, the Yazidis are surrounded by Sunni Arab areas. And as ISIS started coming, those became hostile areas. And so in 2014, they invaded Sinjar city and the regions around it. And so this was when ISIS came in practically. Yazidis directly following the narratives that we have been talking about for a bit, being infidels, you're either gonna turn Muslim or you're gonna be killed. That's sort of the two options. You didn't have any other option. So the Islamic State ISIS started invading Yazidi villages. They would divide the men to a side, the women in a side, the kids into a side. Women would be taken to sexual slavery, and men will be directly killed, while children were taken to sort of ideological camps, and they were used later. And here is where my experience started. And if you want, I can elaborate on that. I know I took a long time, so maybe.
No, I mean,
yeah,
it's a lot. I mean,
it's a lot to sort of put it all in one story, but it's all connected in some way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to process. I mean,
mm-hmm.
It's your lived experience. I mean,
yeah.
Wow. So then, how your family is surrounded in this village? So you escape, or is there a safe space upon which the people can live?
Well, so I wish there was a map now on the screen so I could explain it, because this region is very different from where we are and where you're from and where maybe our viewers are from. But I'm from Sinjar city, so it's a city, it's a mountain in the middle of a sort of the Iraqi. To the south of it is the Iraqi desert until you go to Saudi Arabia. It's all desert. And to the north, it's like a plain area where mainly there are Yazidis living. It's an Arab region. And then there's the Kurdish region. So what happened, the Israeli, all the roads are closed. Just imagine you are in a region, ISIS controlled it. You know you're considered an infidel. You're gonna die, and all the roads are closed. So where the Yazidis started escaping, the ones that managed was the Yazidi was the Sinjar mountain, which is this strip of mountain in the middle of Sinjar. It's a mountain, and we also started escaping to it. First of all, we escaped into a village that was by the mountain. As I told you, most of villages were destroyed in 70s and 80s. This mountain is not populated anymore. The water sources are destroyed. Everything. There's no way you can live in it. But we escaped to the mountain. There were people living in the side of it who have returned back in the day. And so there were those families who hosted us and gave food to people who were escaping. But after we went a little bit more to the mountain, we started hearing guns and stuff. This is the first day they started killing people in the ground. And we heard that the guns that killed people, we had just eaten lunch with them. This is August 3rd. Then throughout from August 3rd till August, I think 11th or 12th. So this is where the story gets a little shaggy. We were in Sinjar Mountain. This is a dry mountain. We had to escape from the south of it to the north. It's a dry mountain. Hundreds of thousands of people escaped in it. You have one option. Either you're going to go down from the mountain, ISIS is going to kill you, or God knows what they're going to do to you, or you're going to stay in this dry mountain and die. So we stayed there for more than 7 days on the mountain. And then the strip to Syria, we are close to Syria. That's where the Kurdish forces, YPJ, this is people, Kurdish protection units. Those are the US-backed forces now, Syrian Democratic Forces, and those, they were able to manage to open a corridor. We escaped to Syria first, to the Kurdish region, and then we managed to go to the further north, the Kurdish region in Iraq. But it was a terrifying experience of hunger and thirst for days. Kids were dying in the ground, and there's a lot to be said in that part in itself, but I just had to simplify it too. In a little bit, yeah. I hope it's you're able to process it in some ways.
Yeah, I'm still processing it. I can't, you know, I haven't gone through something like that.
It's a genocide. It was an absolute genocide. So we have to talk about, maybe if you give me to talk about why this was a genocide. I mean,
why do you? Yeah, obviously it is a genocide.
Yeah, it wasn't just
tell
like
your story.
Yeah, well,
it was. Yeah.
It wasn't just like another. It's hard for me to show how different of something this is. It's another scale. You have a whole city falling. Okay, when you have a village, for example, Kocho, this is further from the mountain. This is the furthest Yazidi village from the mountain, and it's in Arab areas which were already controlled by ISIS by the time the genocide started. They got into the village. They separated. This is a more than 2,000 people village. You have 1,000 men. They killed them all. Women, all directly into sex slavery because you're a Yazidi. That's it. We want to eliminate this group culturally, genetically, everything. And then the kids, the Yazidi kids, were directly taken. They were directly taken into rehabilitation camps. This is what they did. They would be taught not just Quran, but sort of the jihadist part of it, the fundamental way of learning it for years. And they were turned to actual like ISIS terrorists. They were taught how to use guns. They were called Ashbal al-Khilafa, meaning the little lions of the caliphate. And later on, those Yazidi kids, when the operations against ISIS started by the Iraqi forces and stuff, they started using them as bomb holders. There were examples. We know kids from my own village, they would put bombs on them and make them run towards the Iraqi forces. So this was a total destruction of a community. The city until now, Sinjar city is destroyed. I mean, there is rebuilding now. 6,000 Yazidi women were taken. Only 3,000 and something are liberated by now. We have 3,000. No one knows where they even gone. And their areas of controls are gone. There isn't a big place that they control anymore, but we don't know what happened to these women at all. Until now, there are massive mass graves that are discovered, 10,000 Yazidis that we know were killed. This is excluding all the people who died in the mountain, people we don't know records of them, the lost ones. It was an entire destruction of a community, and it was all done in a matter of few days. While the international community and the Iraqi government and the Kurdish government in Iraq, they were just witnessing it.
Yeah, talk about. I've seen this over and over again, you know, in a lot of instances where you'd expect that there's like a lot more clout internationally to stop these kind of things. And I don't know if I can count. I can perhaps say, just to be more accurate, that they be reduced in most successful cases, the amount of people who would have died, but they have never actually stopped mass killings from happening in spaces that are non-Western for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here is the deal in the case of Yazidis. So here it's important to talk about. This wouldn't be just a normal international. We're not talking about a typical call for an international intervention to save those people. No, this is not it wouldn't be an act of love for him. This is, until this moment, Iraq is under the responsibility of the United States. The international coalition was already in Iraq. The forces are already in Iraq. The Iraqi army is already under the supervision of the United States. So there was a responsibility here. This is one thing. The other thing is, it's not like something we are asking, come and fight and stop this. It was more of, for example, there were several missions by the US Army. They would go into ISIS areas, invade a prison, get out some US soldiers or some people that were in there, okay? They would go special missions and they would extract people from within ISIS areas. For months, Yazidi women were in one school in Tel Afar, which is one city in Iraq. No one invaded. They could have easily, with the capacities they have done in other missions, they would have done that. There wasn't any efforts, real efforts to save the community. And this is not just saying that, well, this human rights issue, but it was rather than the United States was responsible of the security of Iraq at this point. It was a matter of responsibility rather than just a mission for protecting human rights. If you get what I'm trying to hit on there.
Yeah, I understand it.
Yeah.
Wow. So what leads to the collapse of the Iraqi state? Like briefly from, there's like this Ba'ath party that you talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
On Saddam is kind of on a mission to resuscitate the great Iraqi civilization, Babylonia, the new Iraq, through the Ba'ath party.
Yep.
And then is successful, and his rivals, the Iranians, are going down, and then things start going hayway.
Yeah.
So what happens? Can you briefly tell us what happened?
Yeah. I think again I will need to give it some modern Iraqi state history, if that's okay. Yeah. So we agreed that, well, I already mentioned that in 1920s, the modern Iraqi state is built. Okay. So, but this state is not really built in real ground. That's a problem of nation state throughout, let's say, the global South spaces. The Iraqi state wasn't built on real historical grounds. You have pieces of the Kurds who don't identify as Iraqis. You have sliced them and put them in Iraq. You have a big Sunni population who really sort of have problems with the Shias in the south. And it's not just one dominant group. You have three major groups that are not really big fan of each other. But the biggest issue that the colonial forces did, and that led to this post-colonial problem, is that, so in Iraq you have 60% Shia, is the majority. It's south, a little bit of center, 60% are Shias. This is a fact. then you have less than 20%, if not less than 19 or 70%, are Arab Sunnis. And then you have 20% the Kurds, and then you have minorities like Yazidis and the Christian Kildans, and even we had Jews back in the day, big hundreds of thousands population. What the British did when they left, they gave the ruling to the Sunnis. Okay, so the layer of ruling layer that the colonial rule left, the educated one, the military leaders, the politicians, the thinkers, majority were Sunni Arabs. Okay, so you have
minorities,
but the majority of people who were left in leadership
were Shiite.
Were Sunnis. Okay, so majority
No, majority population is the Shiite.
Yes.
Ruling class is the Sunni.
It's the Sunnis.
Even though they are a minority in Iraq.
Yeah. So what the British did, they brought this king, the Hashemite kingdom, the cousins of the guys in the Hashemite kingdom in Jordan, their cousins, Malik Hussein, the King Hussein, their cousins, they brought them, they were Sunnis, Arabs, they brought them to rule the kingdom of Iraq. What happens in 48, the communists take over. This is Abdul Karim Qasim. The guy built a communist state in Iraq, privatized the land. This was the first guy who was like all Iraqis sort of accepted him. Is there a problem with the meat?
Just go on. No.
Yeah. So this guy sort of start building the Iraqi identity. The republic is built. There's a more reviving of Iraqi, but under sort of socialist principles, and sort of the Kurds, Arabs, Shia, Sunni, all of them accepted him. But what happens in the 60s and late 50s, the nationalists come to power. Those are Sunni Arab nationalists, and those were the precursors for the Ba'ath Party, which comes in 70s. And that's the Saddam's party, the Ba'ath Party, the Arabic socialist sort of party. And what Saddam does is that he coups even on his own party, which was the president Ahmed Hassan Bakr. He coups, he becomes the president. He kills every opposition to him in the first day of his ruling. Then he comes and he says, well, there is the historical framework is very important here. When the Saddam comes to power, 1979, around that era, what's happening back then? The Shah, the Shah in Iran is falling, 1979, and Khomeini comes there. Khomeini comes, Islamic Revolution. So he calls for Islamic Revolution. This is a Shia-led Malali revolution, and he's like, not only in Iran, we're gonna start exporting it. Well, who is the first target? It's Iraq, absolutely, because you have 60% Shia, they're oppressed, they're majority, and the Sunnis are ruling them. So what Saddam did, he's like, it was sort of this preemptive war. We're gonna go attack them because they're gonna come over to us. They're gonna revolt if you don't start warring them. So it was sort of a exporting crisis. And so what happened during Saddam, it's right, he was kind of winning. He had so much power, but you have 9 years war, 9 years war with a country that's way bigger than you, that can sacrifice way more than you. So by the end of the war, we didn't win any territory. We didn't lose any territory. Saddam says he has the victory. But what has happened now? The war is over. Iraqis are finally, we're gonna sit down after 9 years of war. What he does, the problem is that now there were Arab Gulf countries and even Americans who pushed him to do the war against the Islamic Revolution. And they told him, we're gonna support you. So Saudi Arabia, Kuwait were giving him money with tens of billions of dollars. Now war ends. Those guys are telling him, give us the money back. But he thought he was protecting Arab nations and he's the Arab leader. Now they're telling him, now we give you money, give it back to us. And so that's where the problem starts. The Kuwait is asking him for billions of dollars. The Saudis kind of forgave him, but they were still asking him. And the infrastructure of Iraq is gone. The country is dead. People have died. The economy has fallen. What happens is that now they're asking him for money, and he's telling Kuwaitis, forgive us. They're like, no, 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 we protected you. They're like, no. So he starts invading Kuwait. And that's when the invasion of Kuwait starts. So when he invades Kuwait, now we have, you know where it starts from that. So you have the Western invasion, the sort of international community response to that, and then an embargo for more than 10 or 11 years from 1991 till 2003. This is an embargo. Even medicine wasn't coming to Iraq. So the society is fully destroyed. And then there were constant attacks by the Clinton administration, by the Israelis on the sort of energy sources in the country, and that's where it leads us to 2003. Now the country is devastated. The economy is gone. The people are dying. The infrastructure is gone. The state is all sectarian, divided. The Shias are rebelling in the south. The Kurds are rebelling in the north. And then you have the American invasion in 2003. In the middle of all this, it's invaded. The country is further destroyed, and the whole nation is dissolved militarily and bureaucratic-wise. So I hope that was a good summary of all of it, but it's just like a brief talk on it in some way.
Yeah, I know, because the American invasion sort of creates conditions upon which extremists find can sort of panacea in powerful and influential preachers who are in prison camps for practicing extreme jihadist versions of Islam. Then that becomes the breeding ground for ISIS and revamped Al Qaeda, right?
Well, so there are three dimensions of how Iraq became. It's not the Iraq that's been portrayed today. Iraq in 80s, there are records. Sheikh Zayed, the Emir of Dubai, he came to Baghdad and he was like, I hope one day Dubai will be like Baghdad, because Baghdad was developed, the city, it was a very developed and emerging country. But what happens after 2003, we talked about how the state has been fully devastated. Now what Jared Kushner was the American sort of civilian governance of Iraq, because now we have an occupied space. There's no Iraqi government anymore. You have the American army, and you have the sort of civil government that is put by the occupation army. And Jared Kushner was the guy responsible of this, if I'm sourcing it fully rightly. And what Kushner did was that he that's why I wasn't sure. Tony Bremer.
I think Jared Kushner is Trump's son-in-law.
Yes, I was like, there's a mistake there. Bremer.
Yeah.
Bremer I'm making a mistake. That's why I was like, there's a flaw here. Bremer was the civilian ruler of Iraq from the occupation. And Bremer decided, very genius idea, that I'm gonna dissolve the Iraqi army. Why? Because if we keep a strong army, they might revolt against us one day. So they dissolve the army. What happens? Now there's no border control, a huge state as Iraq. There's no security bureaucracy. There's all the old commanders were mostly Sunnis. What happens? They're taken out of their jobs, and those are expert army of one of the strongest armies in Middle East. They go there left out, and what do they build in place? They built an army, a new Iraqi army, similar to what happened in Afghanistan, a new army that's not really structured well, and it's mainly dominated by Shias. So it became a sectarian army in some way. And then in the center and north, the Sunnis areas are open, and you have terrorists coming from Afghanistan, the old jihadis, you have coming from Saudi Arabia, the Wahhabis, all those guys come, money is coming in, international terrorists are coming in, and they start mobilizing this very vulnerable area. And many of those Sunni commanders, professional commanders of Iraqi security, they become leaders of terrorism. And until now with ISIS, so you have these huge groups starting to control cities, and it continues and continues until it led to ISIS.
Actually, this is a good documentary that does all this historical processing. It's on YouTube. It was done by DW. What's the name?
I really recommend it. It's a very good documentary.
What's the name of this documentary? It's The Fall of Iraq or what? What?
Yes, I think it's four. I know it's 4 parts. I've watched some of it. It's in DW. It's very great.
Yeah, I watched the whole thing. It's really well done. I recommend it for somebody interested in it.
Yeah.
Now, how did you end up in America?
Well, that's when back to my story, personal story. So after we escaped the genocide and the Sinjar region, we went to North Iraq to a city called Sulaimania. And in Sulaimania, we lived as displaced people there for more than, that's 2014, 2017, more than 3 years. I personally, my family continued, and it was a very hard um, experience for a few years there, because I was the only Yazidi in a school that was 300 students. I was the only different religion one, only person from a different city, only IDP. So these are 3 years of constant like discrimination, talks, disrespect that I had to go through. Not to mention, to deny that there were people also loving there and welcoming in Sulaimania. But so this was a very struggling area, time for me, and we got financially really in a hardship time. So we moved from the city and we started working in a farm while I was going to school too. So we were working. I was a farmer, my family taking care of more than 1,000 trees while being in school, in high school. So it was a constant struggle, but I kept going and I kept studying, and I was one of the best students. And then at some point, an opportunity opened to United World Colleges, which is a network of international colleges. Schools, those are high school, but they're boarding high school with people from all around the world. And they had 2 scholarships for Yazidi people. So I was like, well, let me apply for this. Maybe it's a chance. I'm a poor farmer, student, IDP, really in a bad shape. So I was like, maybe this is an opportunity. Maybe it's a call. And I applied, and I remember I didn't have enough money to go to the interview. So my dad had to borrow it from some people for me to go to the interview. I go to the interview. It was tens of people. I don't know how many applied, but I managed to get to the top 2 of the selection, and then I was selected. Then I went to United World College of Adriatic in Italy for 2 years, and then after that we had Davis Scholars. This another scholarship I applied for it in the United States in College of Idaho. There was a range of American universities. I chose College of Idaho back then, and
you could have gone to St. Lawrence.
yes, the ones I applied to were more of Earlham, Methodist, Bennington College, and Olaf. Those were the ones that I had, and I chose. Yeah, and I had St. John, which is in Annapolis. That was another I was very like in between the two, but I chose College of Idaho, which is an interesting decision. And I ended up here in the United States, and now it's 3 years. It's been an interesting experience. 3 years, a lot of change, but I cannot go back because I have security. I mean, we have talked about the story back home. It's not a place I could easily go back.
No, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sort of stuck here, but it's been interesting. Yeah.
Wow, what an amazing story. I mean,
it's way more than that, but that's sort of
that's what we're gonna grab for now, right?
Yeah.
Look, I gotta tell you, it's been really nice learning from you, your expertise in the Middle East in class, and
Professor,
you bring so much contribution
yeah,
to our discourse usually, and it's a super charming personality. I mean, all your challenges that you've gone, it seems like you're walking through, trying to get past them, and it's nothing that is of your doing, of your fault. It's just, post-colonial challenges.
Yeah.
And mostly colonial, sometimes colonial, right?
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, you share a lot of that too, I'm sure, in some parts, but it's we are challenged in every way. Sometimes I think of it like life is not just unfair, it's so disproportionately unfair, you know, like you are born in a complex residential complex with no development, anything, in the middle of nowhere in Iraq, you know, where there is war, there is death, there is killing, then you go through a genocide, then you are an IDP, then like my life was all existential threats that were none of my own contribution, but I think that's what makes me in some ways.
But
It's
you're
that
strong and you're smart, and
I try
we're
to.
learning about
We
Yazidis.
have to. We have to be. There's no any other option. If you want to
Yeah,
do something, we have to be. Yeah.
we're learning about Yazidis from you. I mean, before I met you, I just knew about it briefly, like I vaguely, and I was always confusing the Kurds and the Yazidis, and the complexity of the Middle East is so hard to grapple. So thank you for coming to the show and
Uh,
educating us, and
yeah.
with uplifting, rich, and historically nuanced narrative about Iraq and the Yazidi situation. And we
Thank you.
hope we
Thank
hope
you,
that
Professor. I
the
really appreciate it. It's here is the deal. Every time I'm given an opportunity to talk about my community, I'm grateful because uh, me being a Yazidi has got me into here in some ways. It's through who I am that I have got here, and it's I find it as a duty to work for my community too, where I'm able, when I can give a voice to it, give a sound to it. I think it's a duty in some ways.
and there you have it. I think we are really grateful to have you and thankful for your time and your
Yeah.
story. And if you like this kind of stories, you please subscribe and share so we can encourage more people to join this conversation. And we are very grateful to Dler Awsman for his wonderful narration of Iraqi and Yazidi situation and education on the greater Middle Eastern politics. So thank you and see you next time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.